Now, ladies and gentlemen, the biggest liar in West Virginia. I think he's the man that told us a fishing story here last year. From South Charleston, West Virginia, Mr. Paul Lepp.
Thank you. This is one of the few contests that you can win more than once and your reputation goes down instead of up. There stands a bridge in Fayette County, West Virginia, which is the longest single-span arch in the world. It's the second highest bridge in the whole country, and it's called the New River Gorge Bridge. It's a spectacular sight. If you've never been to see it, you owe yourself a trip. If you do go, there's only one thing that you need to know, and that is, don't stop in the middle of that bridge for any reason. I'm an experienced man, let me tell you why. Well, I woke up one morning and it was the second Saturday in May, and it was such a beautiful day that I decided I was obligated to drive down to the Kanawha River and catch some carp. Well, I loaded my gear into the great golden carp cruiser, which I call the GC for short. I kissed my wife goodbye and I drove down to the South Charleston 7-Eleven. I only had $5, so I bought the cheapest six-pack I could find, a little can of Vienna sausages, and a great big can of Green Giant brand corn for the carp. Well, I still had $1 left over, so I bought one of those brand new scrape-off lottery tickets, too. Well, I went back out to the GC and I scratched that ticket, and folks, it was my lucky day. That ticket was worth $1,000. Well, I knew there was only two things I could do, the first of which was to take that ticket home to my wife and never see a penny of that money again. The second was to cash that ticket, spend all I wanted, and tell her I won whatever was left over. Well, I cashed that ticket quicker than a Confederate dollar at Appomattox. I bought me a full tank of gas for the GC, and I lit out to see almost heaven with 980 crisp new $1 bills in my pocket. It was a respectable wad. I was smiling like a carp at a sewer hole in a rainstorm. Until I hit that bridge. Well, I had just started across when I heard this ominous sound that went thump, 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 thump. I had a flat tire. Well, I eased on the brakes and I coasted to a stop right dead in the middle of that 1,700-foot-long bridge, right there 876 feet above the old New River. Well, a flat's a flat, so I got out and I sweated in that hot sun. And you know, one of these days I'm going to get a tire iron for the GC, because by the time I got those lug nuts off with a pair of channel locks, I was hot, tired, and mad. I guess I was a little too mad, because I picked up that flat tire and I flung it in the trunk, and I reached in with both hands and grabbed that spare, and I turned around and I slammed it down onto the pavement. Well, that tire bounced. It bounced about 20 feet up into the air, and it came down about 2 feet away from the edge of the bridge. It was the wrong 2 feet. I stood at the edge and I watched that tire fall 876 feet down to that old New River, where it bounced once or twice and landed standing upright in 3 feet of water. Well, I looked 850 feet to my right to the end of that bridge and a half a mile down that gorge. And I looked 850 feet to my left to the end of that bridge and a half a mile down the gorge. I did some quick ciphering. I calculated it'd take me anywhere from 9 hours to 2 days to hike down there and get that tire. Then I thought about my monster stick. That's my 9-foot surf casting rod. It's got this reel full of 6 miles of brand new 50-pound strand carp cord. If I could tie a hook on the end of that line, lower it away, snag that tire, and haul it back up to where I stood without ever taking a step, I began to feel good. I think that's about the same good feeling that John Brown had right before he put his Harper's Ferry plan into action. Well, I tied that hook on and I lowered away, and everything went fine for about 850 feet, and then the biggest red bird I ever saw mistook that hook for a spider rappelling off the bridge. He swooped down, snapped up that hook, and landed in a nearby rhododendron tangle. Well, I thought of my mother and her bird feeder, and I gently tried to ease that bird up out of that bush, but he wouldn't budge. And then I thought of my West Virginia state income tax return and how I'd check that little box for the non-game wildlife fund. I thought to myself, Paul, this is the bird you bought. I took up all the slack out of that line and I hauled back on the monster stick, and that bush simply erupted into a mushroom cloud of crimson feathers and purple blossoms floating gently down to the river. Out popped that hook with the bird and a good number of blossoms attached, on a perfect trajectory about a foot above the water, heading right straight for my tire. Well, that was good. And then a 4-foot trout leapt clean out of the water, mistook that bundle for his Fly of the Month subscription and paid cash on delivery. He swallowed that whole thing, splashed down into the water, swam 16 feet through the river, hit his head on a rock, somersaulted up into the air, right through the center of my tire, and landed up on the bank. Well, he just lay there flopping. And I stood 876 feet above him looking down, and I saw rustling in the bushes, and the biggest black bear I ever saw stepped out, went directly over to my fish, sniffed it once or twice, and swallowed it. Well, I began to feel good again. Because I knew there was nothing in the woods, nor in the river, nor in the air that was going to try and eat that bear. I was going to get my tire back. Well, I started reeling. I reeled that bear's head right through my tire till it settled down over his shoulders. Then I started reeling up. Well, I was bringing him up just fine. I just barely broke a sweat when I heard a voice. Now, this was no ordinary voice. This was the kind of voice that would wake you up in the middle of the night and tell you if you didn't raise $8 million, you were going home. Well, the voice said, "Son, what are you doing?" Well, it took me back a little bit. I said, "I'm just trying to get my tire." The voice said, "It looks to me like you're fishing." Well, the man that belonged to the voice stepped around from behind me and looked over the edge, and I believe it's fair to say he was a mite surprised at what he saw coming up. I know I was surprised because that man was a ranger. Well, there was nothing I could do but keep on reeling, and all the fight had gone out of that bear at about 500 feet. So when I got him up over the side, he just kind of laid there, and not knowing what else to do, I reached for my tire. "Freeze," said the ranger. Well, I froze. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out this little book, and he reached into his front pocket and pulled out this little pencil, and he started writing. Well, he wrote for a long time. All I could see was pages flipping. He'd stop and lick that pencil and write some more, and finally he stopped, and he looked at me like I was crazy or something. And he said, "Son," he said, "I don't know how you done this, and I don't know why you done it, but I do know what you done." He said, "I can tell you, you're in more trouble right now than the West Virginia State Legislature." He said, "Let's see if we understand each other." He said, "You see that bear right there?" He said, "That's a black bear. That's the state animal of the great state of West Virginia, which you've taken illegally out of season without a permit. That's a $500 fine." He said, "That fish hanging out of that bear's mouth is a brook trout. That's the state fish of the great state of West Virginia, which you've taken from a no-fishing zone with bait unlawfully obtained. That's a $100 fine." He said, "That bird hanging out of that fish's mouth is a cardinal, state bird of the great state of West Virginia. That's your unlawful bait. That's a $100 fine." He said, "Those flowers hanging out of that bird's mouth, those are rhododendrons, state flower of the great state of West Virginia. That's another $100, and to top it all off, that tire hanging around that there bear's neck constitutes litter, which you caused to be dumped into a state scenic river." He said, "That's a $150 fine." He said, "Said fines in aggregate shall total $950 payable in cash immediately on the spot, or you shall be lawfully confined until such time as payment is made." Well, he stopped for a breath, and he looked at me and looked at my holey blue jeans and my worn-out army boots, looked over at the rusty old GC tottering on 3 wheels. He said, "Son, you look like the kind of person that's going to opt to be lawfully confined until such payment is made." Well, I told you he was already looking at me like I was crazy, and when I broke into an ear-to-ear grin, he reached for his gun. But it was unnecessary because I just dug down in my pocket and pulled out my lottery wad. I counted him out, 950 of those 980 crisp new $1 bills, and I put them in his hand. There's nothing he could do but let me go. He was even so kind as to take me to a service station that was owned by his brother-in-law, where they fixed my flat tire for the amazing low price of only $28. Well, as I was in the GC, headed back for SC, I thought back on my day, and I realized that if every fishing trip was so expensive, I certainly wouldn't be able to afford to go every day. And then I thought about my wife. Now, I've told you people this story, and I'm sure you believe it. I'm a reliable man. My wife is a suspicious sort. I was pretty sure that if I went home and told her this story that night, well, she wouldn't have believed it. It was against my grain, but I decided to lie to her. So when I walked in and she said, "Hi, how'd it go today?" I said, "Fine. And by the way," I said, and I reached into my pocket and I pulled out those last 2 crisp new lottery dollars and I handed them to her and I said, "Look what I won for you today, sweetheart." Thank you.
Paul Lepp.